Before we begin this episode of Backwards Marathon, I would just like to say that, considering that this is the biggest metal band on the face of the earth, I know that my feelings are mine and mine alone. You don't have to agree with me, you can agree with me, it does not matter. You're gonna hate my opinion one way or the other. My thoughts are gonna piss someone off, and for that, I'm very thankful. If my opinions can create that much of a reaction out of you, I've done my job. Normally I would want that to be a positive thing when I'm talking about bands that I actually care about, but when it comes to the sense of Metallica, I'm not gonna make you feel one way or the other about the band's material. You already have your own thoughts about it. So no matter what I say, do, think, or try to describe in the following video, you are free to have your own opinions. It does not reflect on you as a person. It only reflects on you as a person if someone else has differing opinions and it makes you pissed off. So again, if you don't want to hear opinions that are not your own, please just turn off the video now. Thank you. Alright, let's get this shit over with. Metallica, the biggest metal band to ever exist. Not the first, not the best, but the biggest. They're the most popular, it's undeniable. The fact that this year and next year they're still selling out football stadiums, as other bands maybe will get to arenas, or usually just mid to little higher size venues. Metallica is that band that everyone has looked up to at some point, shape, or form. They are that band that everyone strive to be. They want to be that popular, but be able to do it in their own way. And between all of these albums, Metallica has done their own thing. You may not like it, you may love it. That is up to you. I have my own thoughts on this, and of course, I wouldn't be into music if it wasn't for Metallica. I don't think that really needs to be said. Almost any metalhead of my generation above and a little before, you don't need to feel otherwise. Metallica is that band, and there's no shame in saying that, no matter how much you love or hate the band. When I was playing drums, yeah, Lars was my first inspiration, and I learned every single Metallica song from Kill 'Em all the way through I Disappear. That's how I was, that's how I learned to play, and I'm not ashamed of saying that. Although there is a certain point that will be coming up where it kind of changed everything for me. But if you don't already know the story, we'll get to that when we get there in chronological order. And speaking of chronological order, let's finally get into it with Kill 'Em All the way back in 1983. This is more of almost an American version of a new wave of British heavy metal sound. Of course, there's thrash to it, but it really does have that new wave of British heavy metal sound thrown throughout all of it. I mean, you can hear everything from Maiden to Diamond Head to Venom to even a little bit of Merciful Fate going on throughout this album. It's undeniable. The production is very, very raw. You can still hear the bass, but it's a light-sounding bass, all things considered. It didn't get as heavy as it did on other albums. There's still songs on here that I can very much appreciate, and it is a very, very strong effort from the band, especially for their first outing. And I'm pretty much going to rank this in order of Metallica, from best to worst, I guess is the way I'm going to do this. Again, I'll get to my points later, but yeah, all things considered, as far as Metallica albums go, I'm giving it a B. Ride the Lightning in 1984 is, without question, my favorite Metallica album. For the longest time, it was another album which I'll be talking about later, but as I grew up, as I got a little bit older, I realized that everything on Ride the Lightning was for me at the time. Fight Fire with Fire, I feel, is potentially the best Metallica song. Fade to Black is the first power ballad, I guess you could say, from the band, and it's weird, I used to know people who would not listen to anything but Kill 'Em All because of Fade to Black. They sold out. Yes, there are those people who exist, still to this day. They're dying out, but they still exist. The Call of Cthulhu is a great instrumental. I think there's so many great things about this album at the time, especially if you're into this style of music. And I'm gonna be ranking it highest of all. So, again, if you want to shut this all off, feel free to do so now, but I'm giving Ride the Lightning an S. Master of Puppets is up next, and it has a huge resurgence thanks to Stranger Things, and Master of Puppets being a part of that. I never saw that season, I never saw the episodes in question, so I have no idea what the reference really is alluding to. I gave up after season 2. But this album is widely regarded as the greatest metal album of all time, or at least the greatest thrash metal album of all time, and you're right to think so. I don't agree, but you are entitled to your own opinion. There's really great songs in the whole genre here. I mean, Welcome Home Sanitarium is a great slower song. Damage Inc. is the perfect way to close out the album. Orion might be the best instrumental that they've put out. Battery, of course, is a great way to open the album. The title track, of course, I mean, how could you not talk about that? And everything else that makes up this album makes this probably the most well-rounded Metallica album. And I'm going to give it an A, which I'm sure is going to piss a lot of you off. And Justice for All came out, and for the longest time, when I was first getting into the band, this was my album. This was my favorite Metallica album. This was the album that I also had the hardest time learning the drums for, and if you listen to the album, you understand why. Everything from the title track with its odd time signatures to Dyer's Eve being the fastest Metallica song, at least as far as the drums go. Harvester of Sorrow is another challenging one, and of course, that legendary drum beat of one that every drummer wants to be able to play. Of course, the production is quite raw on this album. There's no bass whatsoever. If you can hear it, you're a liar. And it is the proggiest album that they've ever put out. It changed who I was. Until I reached the age of reason, this was the album that changed who I was as a person. And I still held it into high regards until that point. And even when it comes to Metallica albums go, I'm still gonna give this an A. The Black Album, the biggest album of Metallica's career. I don't think that really needs to be spelled out for anybody unless you are very, very young or metal is not in your subgenre, which I'm kind of surprised you're checking out this video if it's not. But the Black Album is that album that changed the landscape of what hard rock and heavy metal could really be. This was the first album not to be a thrash album in any way, shape, or form. It never really got fast. It was pretty much slow to mid-tempo all the way through. Enter Sandman, the most played song in Metallica's discography. Sad But True, which Kid Rock covered and destroyed. Well, sampled, but I mean, semantics here. Don't Tread on Me, the Libertarian anthem, and boy does that make a lot more sense once you see them grew up. Of Wolf and Man, I think is the best song on the album, and I agree with Jason Newsted, this should have been an instrumental. There is some high quality moments on here, and it really does deserve the recognition that it got. It changed the landscape of heavy music, and how many bands would still be here if it wasn't for this album? Where would the genre be if it wasn't for this album? It still sells so many copies every single week. If your band can do that, my hat's off to you. But I don't think it does in compared to the Black Album, one of the best-selling albums of all time. I really don't hold it in that high of regard. There's a couple songs on here that I do still enjoy when I am forced to hear the radio or I'm forced to hear Metallica. The Unforgiven is one of them. Of Wolf and Man, like I mentioned earlier. But yeah, you're gonna start getting pissed from here on out, probably. But I'm giving this one a C. Now here comes where things are gonna be very, very controversial. Load. Yes, the first of two albums that feature blood and semen on the cover. I bet you can guess what the other one is. With Load, this was one of the first albums, or at least songs, that I started to hear were off of this album. And, you know, Ain't My Bitch, 2x4, House That Jack Built, King Nothing. Hero of the Day is one of my favorite Metallica songs, if I had to pick some. The Outlaw Torn is probably my favorite epic that they've done. Bleeding Me, one of the best ballads that they've done. And I'm not ashamed of saying that. I don't think there's any song on this particular album that sucks. And I really hope, again, that pisses some of you off. And so much so, no, I'm not gonna be that much of an asshole. But I am gonna be this much of an asshole. I am going to give Load an A. Now, for the total polar opposite, Reload is a stinking pile of shit. There's one good song off the album, and that is Fixer. I almost would have gave it to Unforgiven too, but twang guitars have just been integrated into my mind for so long that I just can't do that song anymore. Fuel is the only single off the album that's even worth listening to. The Memory Remains just grades into my skull. Marianne Faithfull lyrics just piss me off, and it's just the la 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 la. It's one of the only things that makes me like physically angry when I listen to music. Like, it does make me want to punch something out these days. I never will, but boy, do I want to. Yes, this album is literally just the songs that were not good enough to be on load. And whether you agree with that statement or not, that's how I personally feel. And you can't convince me otherwise. It's all the shit that was not good enough to be on load. Except for Fixer, which I think was a time thing. Had they released this as a double album, I think it would have been the most average album Metallica ever made. It would have been 50-50 because there's such good stuff and such shit on what would have been that double album. But thankfully, you don't have to listen to it as a double album. They are separated. And yeah, the first of many, you'll be seeing a D for Reload. Oh, here we go. I can finally tell the story as old as time. Saint Anger, 2003, the year that changed my life. At this point, I was a Metallica fanboy, and pretty much from 98 to 2003, say May or June 2003, I was the biggest Metallica fanboy that you could ever find. All I wore was Metallica shirts, all I would play is Metallica songs, all I would listen to is Metallica if I had my own choice. There was no band I loved more than Metallica. Then Saint Anger came out, and it broke me out of that shell. But not at first. I didn't realize that it betrayed how I thought of the band at first. I thought that they were just trying to do something different. And honestly, they were. But it took so many listens and months after for me to realize that this album is the stinking pile of dog shit that it really is. I know it's got its defenders now, because a lot of people love that noisy / nu metal sound that they were going for, and I don't understand it. There's nothing you can say to make me understand why you love Saint Anger. You can all you want to, and I will never ever try to change your mind. But this album is regarded as one of the worst albums of all time, and it is. And if it wasn't for me breaking out of my Metallica shell because of Saint Anger, I never would have grew up to discover other kinds of music, and I would probably be the fucking pleb that only listens to Pantera and Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, all the legendary bands, and every other band is shit. And I'm so fucking thankful I never became that. I almost went in the polar opposite direction where I can't really listen to any of those bands because of the fan bases involved. Granted, there's some times that I can listen to it and it doesn't make me physically angry. Again, The Memory Remains is the only song that just grades into my skull. But Saint Anger overall is a shittier album. It is pure shit, and I don't believe you if you say it's not. You can all you want to, you will never change my mind. If there was an F on this list, I would give it an F, but since there's not, it is a D. Death Magnetic. The polar opposite reaction for many people, where they felt that Saint Anger was the worst album that they made, and this was the comeback of comebacks. I, on the other hand, find it meandering. There's some ideas on this album that really do work, but that's the thing. They're just ideas that work. It doesn't work as a whole. First of all, the production is absolute garbage. And I don't say that lightly, especially with some of the shit that I listen to, like a lot of one-man black metal bands. It is forced so high in volume that all it does is clip. It's just a barrage of sound and no dynamics. Even when it gets quiet, you can hear the clipping. You can hear the fuzz and buzz that should not be there if you know what to do with production. It is just a hard listen. And that doesn't even go into the songs, which the songs, for the last 3 albums, I can pretty much say the same thing. They need an editor. They need a producer that's not afraid to tell them what to cut out. That's the one thing I will give Bob Rock until Saint Anger. He was not afraid to tell Metallica what to put in and what to take out. It feels like everyone from Death Magnetic to the new album is afraid to tell Metallica what to do because they are the biggest band on earth. They need an editor. If this album would have been cut 25 to 50%, this would actually probably be a lot more enjoyable than it is, but it's not. That said, it is better than Reload and Saint Anger, but I do feel that it is still a massive D quality. Hardwired to Self-Destruct, the 2016 album, and the album that I've probably listened to the least, with exception to the new album. This double album features some good ideas, followed by a lot of stuff that wouldn't even make Reload. Yes, this never should have been a double album. This probably should have been like maxed out at 40 minutes, and it probably would have been one of the most cohesive albums that they ever put out. But again, it's the editing. No one tells them parts to cut out. Everything just goes way too long on this album. And even the shorter songs that are on here, they're fine. It's the longer songs, like anything that goes past the 5-minute mark on this album, is really rough to get through. And I can't do it. There's a couple songs on here, some of the faster songs on here, I can tolerate. But otherwise, it is just another album where it just suffers so very, very much from a lack of knowing what's good and what's bad. The production is better than Death Magnetic, I will give it that. But that's also not saying a lot, and I have to again, I'm giving it a D. Finally, we come to the album that just came out on Friday, and you're checking it out at least on Monday, 72 Seasons. And I will say, this is the best thing they've done since Load, and I hold Load in high regard, so, that's a good thing. But all of that said, it's not without its faults, and there are aplenty. I'll start off with a positive. I like the fact that they're talking about mental health struggles. I like the fact that they are talking about childhood abuse on this album and how everything can change our lives. The first 18 years of life. I mean, they keep talking about that, pounding that into your skull, what the album is about. And when you listen to it, yeah, I totally understand what they're going for on this album. And again, there's some moments on here that if they were actually refined, would actually be quite enjoyable. And even when I listen to it as a whole, and yeah, to be fair, shoot me, I listened to it once right before I started recording. So it's my brand new thoughts, and maybe it would take additional spins that I just don't want to give to this album to understand it a little bit more. But again, it's the refinement. This album did not need to be almost a full disc worth. This did not need to be nearly 80 minutes long. You could have cut this to under an hour, and it would probably be regarded as the best album since And Justice for All. Maybe even higher than that, to other people who would say Master of Puppets is the best. I would understand that, but as it is right now, again, I feel like it's the best album that they've probably put out in 20-some years. But that's also not the positivity that, at least in my light, it really warrants. It's like, yeah, that sounds good, that sounds great on paper, and then you realize that they put out a lot of stuff that is not worth listening to in the past 20-some years. But all of that said, it is better than their worst material. It's not as good as their best material. If anything, to quote MJF from All Elite Wrestling, it is mid. So yeah, I'm giving it a C. I will be right back to put this all in order, which shouldn't take too long, but I'll be right back at the snap of a finger. And here we go, folks, going from the bottom, now we're here to the top, and a list that is sure to piss you off if you skipped it all the way to here. Starting off at the bottom is their worst album, and one of the worst albums ever made, Saint Anger, followed by one of the worst albums of the 90s, Reload. Then, in the 2000s, another terrible, terrible album, Death Magnetic. And then the kinda better Hardwired to Self-Destruct, rounding out the Ds. In the Cs, I give the very mid 72 Seasons at the bottom of C, followed by the Black Album, of course also known as Metallica, the self-titled album. The lone album in B is Kill 'Em All. In A, which I know pisses a lot of you off and it just makes me so happy, Load, followed by Master of Puppets, and in the A spot, we got And Justice for All. And in the S rank, my favorite Metallica album, even though I can't go back and listen to it, if I do hear a song off of it, it does not make me upset. It is Ride the Lightning. And there you go, folks, my personal ranking, my backwards marathon of Metallica. As there's not a single person alive who will agree with my ranking, make sure to leave your hate down below. I will not be responding to it, but I will probably read it, as I know this is sure to leave some comments. But I do implore you that if you don't completely hate my guts right now, that you should check out my other work here on the Debriefings YouTube channel. I have 877 interviews that I've done, a whole lot more of Backwards Marathon that I've been doing this year, interviews, reviews, other types of videos on here. Give it a check and see if you can get past the hatred of how I feel about Metallica and see if there's something else here for you. And until the next Backwards Marathon interview, review, top 10, or any other kind of video that I put up here on the Debriefings YouTube channel, this is Josh Runquist saying, see ya.